Yo, 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 what's up, YouTube? Smash that sub. I'm just kidding. I'm not a YouTuber. This is a very different format than normal, but it's one that we'll be using over the next few weeks as we practice social distancing and public safety. Sometimes life throws us curveballs, but we got to keep on swinging. So this week we're talking about Revelation. If you've been in my Sunday school class, then you probably already know that this is perhaps my favorite book of the Bible, and that's because it's got some wild, vivid imagery, and it's written with a lot of depth. Plus, it's pretty controversial, which is very fun. I don't mean this as a letdown, but a lot of the things that you think you know about Revelation are probably not true. It's still just as intense and out there as you think it is, but it's not necessarily a book describing the end of the world or a massive war between heaven and hell that's going to happen in the future. In fact, it's not really describing a specific moment in the future necessarily, but rather it's describing this pattern of human society and culture that's been going on for centuries. And it's written to give us hope, not despair. So in this video, I'm going to talk about who the author is, why he's writing, and we'll discuss the first message from Jesus to one of the seven churches addressed in Revelation. So let's get started. Revelation 1:3 says, "Favored is the one who reads the words of this prophecy out loud, and favored are those who listen to it being read and keep what is written in it, for the time is near." Translation, if you're reading this or hearing this, pay attention because it's relevant right now. The author here is a guy called John, and it's not John the Baptist or John the Apostle, but another dude who's really feeling the pressure from the Romans because Christ's followers are stressed and many of them are being persecuted. And John gets himself exiled by the Roman government and sent to this island for basically posing a threat to the empire. The Romans were not fans. Oh, I just hit my microphone. The Romans were not fans of things like magic, astrology, prophecy, stuff that people even today consider a little weird or alternative. Side note, an early Christian writer called Tertullian mentions a prophet in one of his books. The prophet's called John, and he gets sent to island exile after being dunked in boiling oil, and he comes out unscathed. Now, I've not found or honestly really looked for any evidence suggesting that it's the same guy, the same John, or if it's even true. But it's interesting to think about how bad it was for Christ's followers at the time, right? Imagine the government disagreeing with your beliefs so hard that they try to deep fry you in front of your friends. Even through this persecution, churches were still gathering. People were still worshiping, and their faith was being boldly expressed. Is your faith bold enough to face persecution? Okay, back on track. John starts his writing by telling us he's on an island called Patmos. And during his time there, he has this vision or series of realizations about the world and about the seven churches of Asia Minor. And we think of Asia a little differently today, but the churches he's writing to are actually all in what is now Turkey. Keep in mind that he has a specific audience that he's addressing. And we can learn a lot from these writings because, like we read earlier, it's relevant right now. But you have to understand that we are not the intended recipients of the letter itself, even if the Holy Spirit intended for us to be recipients of the message. Kind of like if you were to log into Jonathan's Zoom meeting for the confirmation class, everything you learn is important. But some of the language might be hard to decipher out of context because you're not a confirmation student. Does that make sense? Okay, Revelations chapter 1, verses 10 through 19. I'm going to read this one out of the Bible. Feel free to follow along. It says, "I was in a spirit-inspired trance on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice that sounded like a trumpet. It said, 'Write down on a scroll whatever you see, and send it to the seven churches.' And I turned to see who was speaking to me, and when I turned, I saw 7 oil lamps burning on top of 7 gold stands. In the middle of the lampstands, I saw someone who looked like the human one. He wore a robe that stretched down to his feet, and he had a gold sash around his chest. His head and hair were white as white wool, like snow, and his eyes were like a fiery flame. His feet were like fine brass that had been purified in a furnace, and his voice sounded like rushing water. He held 7 stars in his right hand, and from his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword. His appearance was like the sun shining with all its power. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet like a dead man. But he put his right hand on me and he said, "Don't be afraid. I am the first and the last and the living one. I was dead, but look, now I'm alive forever and always. I have the keys of death and the grave. So write down what you've seen, both the scene now before you and the things that are about to unfold after this." I love that. So John tells us why he's writing this, right? He feels that Jesus is giving him an important message that needs to be shared. And I love the phrase used in this translation, which is the Common English Bible, by the way, Spirit-inspired trance. John is experiencing this really pure form of prayer where he's listening to God with his heart, and the message is being received so clearly that he can see it manifest as a vision. And he writes what he feels God is trying to communicate to these churches. Now, feel free to disagree with me here, but some of the things that he's about to write sound kind of human to me. And he's not sitting down with a laptop taking notes in real time as Jesus is like lecturing to him, right? He's experiencing these revelations maybe in one sitting or maybe over a period of time, and then writing them slowly on a scroll from memory and through his own words. So if there's any language that you disagree with as we study Revelation, or you think Jesus wouldn't have said that, that's totally okay. You're a Methodist, so you can use reason as well as emotion to focus on the underlying message rather than the surface text. Enough preamble and context for now. Here's the meat of the lesson. This is the part that I want you to keep thinking about after you get off YouTube or after you escape the rabbit hole of meme comps and Vice videos. So John writes to each of the 7 churches individually in chapters 2 and 3, but he does this kind of from the perspective of Jesus, as if Jesus is like dictating these things and John is just writing what Jesus is saying. So each time he starts a section for a church, it begins with, "Write this to the angel of the church in blank." He's basically writing what he's experiencing his vision of Jesus saying, and then writing what he's told to write, if that makes sense. But why does it say, "Write this to the angel of the church"? The angel of the church. Well, in the original Greek, the word used would be angelos, which biblically usually means divine messenger now, but in common language, it simply meant messenger. John the Baptist is called angelos in the Gospel of Matthew, so we can assume that it can apply to humans and not just angels. It wouldn't really make sense for John of Patmos to be writing a letter to angels when Jesus is dictating it. Like, just tell him yourself, Jesus. But the humans that he's writing to, these human messengers, are most likely either people in the individual church's leadership, such as pastors or bishops today, or perhaps these were people sent by the churches who came all the way to Patmos to visit John in exile and were expected to bring letters back. Either way, messengers are super important, and we're all supposed to be messengers. We're supposed to be lights of the world. Jesus uses light as a metaphor a lot in the Gospels of Matthew and John and in the parables. And here in Revelation, light comes up again. Remember earlier when we read John describing seeing Jesus? Where was Jesus standing? He was among 7 oil lamps. And what did he have in his right hand? He had stars. He had 7 stars in his right hand. Jesus actually explains what those light-emitting things represent in verse 20. Verse 20 says, "As for the mystery of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand and the 7 gold lampstands, here's what they mean. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches." So he's comparing the churches and their leaders to sources of light. And this is not the only time throughout Revelation that you're going to hear John talk about weirdly specific objects and even creatures. But please keep in mind that they are representations, not necessarily predictions. But we'll get into that in a couple weeks. For now, let's just see what Jesus wants John to tell these oil lamps. So Jesus' message basically starts by saying to the church in Ephesus, "I know how hard your church has worked, and I know how much you've put up with, And I know that you do not put up with evil and with liars and with false prophets. But in verse 4, Jesus goes, "But I have this against you. You have let go of the love you had at first. So remember the high point from which you have fallen. Change your hearts and lives and do the things you did at first. If you don't, I'm coming to you." First of all, how terrifying is that? Jesus is like,
shape up or I'm coming for you.
no, that's my human brain. I don't think Jesus meant that as a threat. It's like when a parent notices you doing something that you should be able to do on your own, and they're like, "Do you need me to help you?" And you're like, "Oh, no, Mom, I can do it." Like, the church is capable of working against evil, but they're starting to do it for the wrong reasons. And Jesus is like, "You sure you got this, or should I just take over?" Because he knows that the Ephesians want to do great things and want to be leaders and demonstrate love and renounce liars and be light, but their reason for doing these things has shifted from when they started. They started these things out of love, and they were motivated by love and righteousness and a desire to follow the example of Christ. But now they're becoming motivated by other things, maybe social status, maybe self-righteousness, maybe the desire to do good things for the clout and not for the betterment of the world. Today, we're seeing a lot of things happening in our world around us, and addressing the things in the world takes dedication and motivation, but you have to check your motivation. I want everybody to check their motivation, even me. Am I doing the right things for the wrong reasons? Even amidst the COVID-19 outbreak, like, are you in isolation to protect yourself or to enjoy a break from school? Or are you in isolation to protect your family and your community and to stop the spread? And people hoarding toilet paper, are they hoarding toilet paper in order to distribute it to people in need who can't get out, like their elderly neighbors? Or are they stocking up because they're only providing for themselves? There's so many opportunities that we're going to face in our lives in which we feel there is a right and wrong decision to make. Just as importantly as making the right decision is acting on that decision with the right motivation. So after this video ends, I encourage you to pray to yourself and pray with your family and pray about your ability to make good decisions and to be motivated by the Spirit to act on them. Have the right motivation, and the right decision will be a lot easier to find. It still takes work, it still takes sacrifice, and it can be extremely hard to act on these decisions. So pray for strength and endurance like the church in Ephesus had. And remember that you always have a community of love and support, even if our community is gathering online for now. Thank you for watching this. I hope you're all finding spiritual nourishment during this time of isolation. Remember to be in prayer, and please be thinking of ways that you can continue to serve your community, even if it's sending a text to a friend that might not receive a lot of texts, or even sharing a link to a music video and saying like, "Hey, this reminded me of you." If you have any questions or comments or want something specific addressed or discussed, hop in the comment section. You can also email me at wsmith@faithtulsa.org with your parents' permission, of course, because Safe Sanctuary exists even online. And I hope to see you soon. Peace.